Good morning. Welcome to the General Government Committee meeting for the City of Tumwater. The date is December 11th. The time is 8 a.m. We will go ahead and get started with roll call, joined by Councilmember Kathy and also Councilmember Dahlhoff, and then myself, Councilmember Althauser. So all three council members are present and accounted for. Our first item is approval the meeting minutes from November 13th, 2024. Is there a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
And a second. I think you seconded there, Councilmember Kathy. You're muted, but I am a lip reader. So all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, motion passes unanimously. Great. There is one amendment to the agenda under additional items. We'll also be discussing the long range work plan for the Community Development Department. But that brings us to item 4 now, which is the contract between the City of Tumwater and the Washington State Department of Fish and Wildlife for phase 4 of the Bush Prairie Habitat Conservation Plan. Brad, I think you're gonna help us walk through this one.
Yes, after I come back from New York. I apologize for not having my things all set up. This is a contract between the WFW and the city. It's for phase 4 of the HCP update. We were approved. We filed earlier this year for a grant to help pay for additional work that we're doing on the HCP, as well as sufficient funds, hopefully, to finish the environmental review process. We were awarded the grant earlier this fall, and we've just finished working through the contract. We are set, to be honest, we're actually starting this work as we speak. But this is a rather large award in the terms of the ones that we've been receiving. We are going to be getting a grant award of $410,000. There's a required match of slightly less than $150,000 that will be split evenly between the city and the port. But this hopefully will get us over the line. As we discussed briefly last night, it appears that U.S. Fish and Wildlife is more willing to work with us, and we're hoping this will be enough to get us through and to at least get us a draft of the HCP that is first of all completed for environmental review and then almost there to adoption. So this is a positive. So we need to just have the General Government Committee assign this to the consent calendar of the next City Council meeting for approval.
Great. That's pretty exciting. Any questions from folks? I don't think I have any either. Pretty straightforward. Joan?
No.
Okay. Yeah, well, like you said, I think this is an exciting development. I think it's great that we're going to be able to work with folks and kind of continue going down this path, because it's definitely going to make things more predictable, and that's kind of the best outcome to continue down. So with that, I guess I would entertain a motion that we place the grant agreement between the City of Tumwater and the Washington State Department of Fish and Wildlife for the phase 4 Bush Prairie Habitat Conservation Plan grant on the January 7th, 2025 City Council consent calendar, with a recommendation to approve and authorize the mayor to sign.
So move.
Second.
Second. All right. Motion by Councilmember Kathy and seconded by Councilmember Dahlhoff. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, motion passes unanimously. Great. So for our next item, we're going to move on to item 5, which is the 2025 comp plan periodic update regarding middle housing.
So let me go ahead and share screen here, provided I can. Can everyone see that?
Not yet, no.
Oh, that's good. Let's try this again. Okay. Can everyone see this?
Yep.
Okay, thank you. This morning, I would like to run, it's been a rather long night starting on Monday, so.
Did you go home last night?
I was asked to go home. And fortunately, the people at home let me in, so.
Phew.
It was a positive all around. We are in a good position actually with this portion of the development code update process for 25 that our consultant SCJ has done a lot of work in coordination with our staff and also with the community in terms of open houses and other things to sort of get us to the stage of being able to show you some code examples, direct code examples that I believe will probably be coming forward as part of the larger code update process in 25. So what I'd like to do is sort of run you through the general concepts just to make sure, obviously, that you understand what is being proposed and also have the opportunity to provide comment early in the process so we can make any necessary tweaks as we go forward. Again, this is driven by some state requirements for middle housing. Obviously, let me just quickly touch again on the need for housing in the city. Excuse me, as I have problems. Currently, we have this, just to back up a little bit, for all of our planning efforts, including our code changes, we are really focused on not only the city, but also our urban growth area. The intent is to update the joint plan with the county at the same time that we're completing our process, as well as update their code regulations to match ours. So when I speak of the housing need and everything, we are literally planning for locations for everything in both the city and the UGA at the same time. So we're not, adding additional growth through the UGA that doesn't make a lot of sense when we're trying to concentrate particular uses in areas that have for higher transit and walkability and all that kind of thing. So our total housing supply in 2020 for both the city and the UGA is a little bit over 12,000. Our housing need is about 9,000. That's obviously a pretty big jump in the next 20 years, but the 9,192 is coming out of the housing allocation process. Again, the state had allocated housing units to the county, and then subsequently the cities and county met together and worked out an allocation method to assign housing units to everybody. We translated the housing units needed into the population we expected, for 2045, because we knew that the housing units needed was a number that was, it was a hard number in terms of what we've been assigned. We knew what the household size was based on the 2020 census, 2.39 per household, and actually that has increased over the past decade. And we're not alone in that. Actually, Olympia has also increased household size. So we're projecting adding another 21,969 people that's sort of represented by the additional housing units. So our projected population for the UGA and the city is slightly over 50,000 by 2045. Again, we're currently city and UGA in 2020 was 28,707. So it's a pretty significant increase. So above and beyond what we're already receiving and seeing now.
Brad, can I ask a question about that, just out of curiosity, for
Sure.
For the household size? Is that because more families are moving here, or because like the amount of children per family across Washington State is decreasing?
Correct.
So does that mean that just the population is changing and that more families are moving here as opposed to existing families having more kids?
I have a couple thoughts.
Or it could be a roommate situation driven by pricey rents.
Yeah, I have a suspicion it's more based on unaffordability. So, children are not launching from existing families, more people having to live in the same space to afford those kinds of things. I think it's probably a bigger driver than overall family size. I think family size probably does also play a factor because we've added so much single family housing in the recent years. I would suspect, that level of influence will level off as we're adding more multifamily perhaps, but I think it's just the fact that people can't afford to move out on their own as much as they had.
I guess seniors living with their family as opposed to independently due to costs is probably another compounding factor.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I was just curious, thanks.
So again, we also have to be planning for our housing need across multiple, my system just decides to go ahead without me actually touching it. That's great. Across multiple, income groups. So what this shows both graphically and so forth is the number of units that the city is planning for each of these income groups. So for example, on the far left, from the 0 to 30, area median income, and that's based on a household of 4 people. We have to be planning for an additional 1,700 units, which is about a quarter of the total new units on there. Those particular units, and perhaps everything under 80% is going to require, is definitely going to be in the multifamily range rather than in the single family housing or even the middle housing. So we're trying to cover, we have other things that we're gonna have to do to try to meet those particular concerns. We're not doing anything actively to plan for the above 120% AMI, but we do know that we're going to be having or being expecting to have the need for those kinds of units in the community. So for middle housing, again, from the left-hand side, we have our detached single-family housing, and it moves up in intensity and use across all the way up to mid-rise, which is probably the biggest example of that is the Kingswood development on I-5 and Tyee. Everything else in between is called missing middle or middle housing. Everything from duplexes all the way up to triplexes in various forms. So we're looking at some broad changes to accommodate the whole larger requirements for the area median, lower in under 80% AMI. First of all, we're looking at removing all references in our zoning code to single family in our land use designations and the zone title districts. The reason for that is effectively because of state requirements, we don't have any single family only zones left. And so our proposal is to remove those kinds of references and also update our land use descriptions in the comprehensive plan to do that. Single family detached dwellings will continue to be allowed within all those zones. We're just moving away from referring to those as the primarily or only single family zone. We're also looking at combining our existing single family low and our single family medium zones into one land use designation and zone district. And those two together easily are majority of the area within the city. There are requirements that are going to be added as part of what we're doing for the state that we'll get into that apply across both of these. And really the only difference after all those requirements are incorporated is some level of density. And so I'll talk a little bit about what that will look like or what we're proposing to think about here.
Can I ask a question about that, Brett?
Sure.
In terms of nomenclature and verbiage, does the state require us to use the term single family? Like I remember Councilmember Dahlhoff, I think you raised in the past, this might have been a year or two ago that I'm remembering, and correct me if I'm wrong, that single family might be a misnomer for some cases where you have 2 families that are living in a single structure. Like single structure medium density is sort of what I envision when I think we say single family, right?
That's actually that's interesting. I'm not sure. And I think that points out a little bit of the confusion when we call something single family. The assumption obviously is a single family is living in a single unit that's not attached to any other units. That's from our perspective, from the zoning side, that's what is usually intended. Councilmember Dahlhoff, I think.
Just to add to that, we've had this discussion, Mike, you're right, just over nomenclature, right? Of neighborhoods, right? Of safety, like this just goes to that of what families look like in Tumwater and that inclusivity. And so it just goes back to the overall conversation of inclusion, equity, of how we're naming things and the connotation with that.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I also think, based on the changes we've already made to our definition of family within the zoning code, it really, it's much broader than it was 20+ years ago. So I
Yeah,
think
for sure.
this is really just sort of updating to meet the current reality. We are also looking at adding some additional definitions to Title 8, Chapter 1804, from Affordable Housing Administrative Design Review, as well as a list of various housing types that I'll get into here in just a moment and a little more explanation. We're excluding 2 residential zone districts that we currently have in the city from the middle housing requirements, and we're allowed to do so under state law. We'll have to state our case in our land use element. But there are 2 special cases that we have to deal with. The first is the residential sensitive resource zone district, which is focused primarily on those areas in the city that have a lot of critical areas in the western part of the city, either Percival Creek or the large wetland complexes south of Trosper, or high groundwater areas in the south part of the city. These areas, we've already had a battle, I think, on the state level about whether or not we can do this. This particular zone district, the density is 2 to 4. So we want to maintain that for the stated environmental reasons. So while we're not going to do the full slate of things that are required under middle housing, we are going to be expanding some of the potential uses that could be allowed in those areas. The other one is our manufactured home park, which is, again, sort of a Tumwater specific zone, which was intended to protect the existing manufactured home parks. The state law has basically said that the middle housing requirements apply to all zones that are primarily for residential use, but it does carve out exemptions for manufactured home park zones. So we're going to be using that because it doesn't make any sense to expand the list of uses that could potentially be allowed and undermine the whole purpose of the district in the first place. So we've talked a little bit about this and the manufactured home park. So we're allowed under state law, we're required to provide at least 6 of the 9 middle housing types in our residential zone districts. And some of them are familiar to you, some of them I'll explain in a little more detail. Duplexes, again, are units that share a common wall. They're typically on the same lot, typically the same ownership. One may be rented, but both may be rented, and so forth. Triplexes and fourplexes are similar things, just expanded. Cottage housing is something the city has had since 2018. That is also going to be expanded slightly. We're actually ahead of the game on that. Townhouses are are essentially single family houses that share a common wall. They have their own yards and so forth, but there's no setback between them. And stack flats are essentially duplexes or triplexes on a vertical rather than a horizontal level. So each floor has its own separate unit. There are 3 that we're not going to be including under our middle housing umbrella, but they are allowed when we're talking about our multifamily side of things. So 5plexes, 6plexes, and courtyard apartments fall into those descriptions. So we'll continue to allow those, but they'll just be in our multifamily zones. So what that means for our use table is we're going to be adding all of these things to what we're currently calling the single family low and single family medium zones. They'll be combined obviously into a new zone there. And we're getting rid of the restrictions that we had placed on duplexes. When we first introduced this a few years back, the intent was just to, I want to say, ease the introduction of duplexes into existing single family developments by placing restrictions on the number of duplexes that could be allowed in a new development or within an area that's already been developed. Dwelling unit density is not an easy thing to explain, and we're still trying to figure out what it means. And it concerns me slightly that others doing the same thing I'm doing across the state are in the same boat. So dwelling unit density functions differently than our current density. So say, for example, we have a 10 acre lot in the city that's currently zoned for single family medium. The range of density that could be allowed if you're going to do a subdivision would be 6 units on the low end, up to 9 units on the high end, subject to getting some other things to get to the 9 units. But it's a pretty straightforward calculation. And really, from our purposes, this would continue. It also allows us to calculate potential impacts over a 20-year period and so forth. From that, we have a better idea of what kind of services we're going to need to provide across the state, the city, and so forth based on that. The state law added an additional twist to density, and they're calling it dwelling unit density. And it really says, it defines the number of dwelling units that have to be allowed on each lot, regardless of lot size. So our current lots in our current code is for single family is limited to 1 single family per lot. That would go away. We actually have to allow for at least 2 dwelling units per lot. And if one affordable housing unit is provided, permanently affordable housing, that would go up to 4. So provided that the overlying density of the area is met, they could also add an additional unit as part of this. We haven't exactly figured out the perfect way to calculate the impacts of this in terms of our needs for water, sewer, and so forth. But it's something that we have to do as part of the comprehensive plan update process. So as I mentioned, this would apply to all of our residential zone districts, or single family and multifamily. We're excluding our manufactured home park and our residential sensitive area. And we don't have no cases where we have a lot that's 1,000 square feet in the city that I'm aware of. Also, as part of this process, we are updating our design guidelines. One of the requirements of the state law code changes is that any design guidelines for middle housing have to be the same as our single families. And currently our single family only looks at 2 things. One, the placement of where the garage is relative to the street and the front of the building, and some provision, I believe, for open space on a lot. We're looking at something that would help us be able to better translate the, going from a large unit middle housing structure to a single family in the same neighborhood. But we're also keeping really in mind that we don't want to add additional requirements that make it harder to build housing in the first place. So our consultant SCJ is looking at those things. Once those things are ready, we'll be bringing them back to you for further discussion. We're also required to allow for 2 accessory dwelling units on residential lots. And currently we are at 1. Now we are going to be required to apply for 2. And also our maximum area of an accessory dwelling unit is going to have to increase under state law to 1,000 square feet. Similar to the lot unit density issue, we're sorting out what that potential impact would be in terms of calculating impacts to the rest of our services. Councilmember Nolhoff.
Brad, with our ADUs, do we know how many have applied to do an ADU like in 2024?
I think it's roughly at the most 10. So again, this is not a huge thing. We've had a lot of conversations with folks who are building ADUs as well as those who want to build ADUs. Because accessory dwelling units require a kitchen and a bathroom, which is, the biggest driver of cost for building. It's still really expensive for people to try to do that as an option. We're exploring what we could do to help those who say want to locate a modular ADU building on a site rather than rely on stick built, which because of labor is more expensive. And then as I probably remember, we have the accessory dwelling unit plans that are going to be updated. So we're still working through things to help with this. I just don't think even if we double or triple the current amount, it's not a huge impact in terms of the housing. Of meeting what we need to do. So we're also have to focus our attention on a lot of other things in addition to the ADUs.
Right. I always liken it to like it's not for the new housing, but for me, it's to keep families together and
Yep.
to meet different needs of different stages of your life. And so I love that we're doing this. And I know it's realistic to not realize we're not going to infill a lot of housing because of that, but we will be able to keep people in Tumwater with quality of life. So I think it's a
Yeah.
win-win.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the other important thing is the accessory dwelling units don't necessarily have to be a separate structure.
Right.
If you have an older building or something that is, you could subdivide internally, you can achieve the same thing and get an accessory dwelling unit. So,
What about the requirement that you're supposed to have two if you have a residential size lot?
that is a state requirement that says we have to allow, if there's sufficient space, obviously, on the site with setbacks and everything else, to allow for at least 2 accessory dwelling units in addition to the existing single family. How that's actually going to work in practice is going to be interesting. We haven't had anybody approach us with that. The reason I say it's interesting is we also have to be thinking about how we handle things like water and sewer connections. In the past, accessory dwelling units had been required to be owned by the main property, and then whatever happened to them would still be under that ownership. Now, we're no longer, we can no longer do that. So what could possibly happen is the accessory dwelling unit could be owned by somebody else from the owner of the main house. From our perspective and being able to make sure that, water service is adequate, properly handled and so forth, we're probably looking at separate connections. The problem is, of course, the separate connections are more expensive. So there's a few things that we're trying to figure out on how that could potentially work.
And in some cases, in that kind of a situation, would the owner of the property pay the water bill, or would the tenant, or is that up to them?
Yeah, it would be up to the owner of the property to pay the water bill. Now, if that ADU, say through a condo process, is carved out as a separate separate lot, which is, under different ownership, then that complicates things, obviously, because then you have 2 different owners dealing with the same connection. Also, as I mentioned, there's an affordable housing requirement that is added as part of the code, and I've included in the staff report examples of all the codes that we're going to probably go forward with presenting as part of the larger update. But if 4 additional units would be allowed on a single lot under the middle housing provisions, provided that one of those is a affordable housing in perpetuity. So we've included some language dealing with how we would handle that. We'll go into more detail about that when we're farther along, but I encourage you to take a look at that. We're also required to make some changes to our off-street parking requirements. For lots that are no bigger than 6,000 square feet, we are limited to requiring only 1 parking space per dwelling unit. We can still require 2 spaces for those lots greater than 6,000. It'll be interesting to see how this is actually handled in the market, because currently even with our smaller lots, we're not seeing an interest from the building community and designing houses that have fewer parking spaces than the two per lot. We also will need to see how this plays out with the effect on the on-street parking in those areas of the city where we have limited on-street capacity for a variety of reasons. So just to be something we will be watching.
Brad,
Yes.
for that, so let's say you're on a lot that's 6,500 square feet. If you have a house, a standalone house, and then you build an ADU, you would need 4 parking spaces to accommodate both those units?
No, there are separate requirements for the ADUs, and I apologize, I don't remember them offhand. I believe if they're within a certain distance of public transit, they're not required to provide an on-site parking space.
Okay.
And if they are farther away, it's a single parking stall. The interesting thing is we're already meeting the state requirements under what our current parking standards are for that. So really the only change would be when we're dealing with middle housing in this particular instance.
Got it. Thanks.
Under cottage housing, the state is requiring us to provide at least 20% of open space for the minimum lot size. This is a change from our current regulations. We have some requirements for open space on a cottage housing development, but we don't have a 20% minimum. So that will add an additional requirement. So the next steps in the process, again, all of our information is being uploaded to our project website. If you have any comments or any concerns, obviously you can reach out to our staff. And we'll be presenting more parts of this as we are developing the code itself. But I think what I presented in the staff report and we discussed today in terms of the middle housing is probably pretty close to what we'll be coming back with the final version of the development code recommendations for middle housing. So if you would like to provide comment on that at any time, that's appropriate.
Are there also associated ordinance changes we'll have to do with this? Like, don't we have an ADU ordinance and a few other ordinances that will probably also have to be updated in a corresponding fashion?
Yeah, we are intending to come back with 2 ordinances towards the end of the year, one dealing with the comprehensive plan update and one dealing with all the development code changes. I know Karen is looking forward to reviewing that. I'm excited because I think we're going to break our record for number of pages. But the important thing is that there's so many different things that are changing. We kind of need to see it all together to make sure that we're not creating more issues accidentally as part of the process. So.
Okay. And so the goal for, because those ordinances, so the goal is to update those simultaneously as we work through the comp plan so that everything comes online at the same time by the end of next year.
Yeah, I think we're going to be attempting to do it all at the same time. I have a feeling based on what I know we need to finish working on for the comprehensive plan update, that the comprehensive plan update items may lead the development code changes slightly, just because we need to get sort of the groundwork in and the policy work done and then finish the regulations. So they'll come shortly thereafter. We'll be talking about them throughout the same period, but I think the ordinances will be dealt with in one after the other as part of the update process.
Did we know that, or did you know that this was coming down from the state? I mean, have you been alerted to what they were working on? Or
yeah, we had 2 years notice on this particular one. I do know that the legislature is considering more exciting changes in the subdivision code this year. So again, yeah, we've been politely suggesting to our colleagues of the legislature to ease off just a little bit, but yeah.
Yeah, it seems like a lot all at once.
Yeah, well, knowing something is coming doesn't mean necessarily we know how to deal with it, but that's another question.
You're going to get this figured out.
Yeah.
Any other questions from folks? There's no action associated with this. It's informational, but
No, it's just to really give you an idea what the code is probably going to look like.
Okay. All right. Well, if there aren't any other questions, and we do have a little extra time here, maybe we can talk a little bit again about the long range plan. Follow up from yesterday's meeting. Yeah,
so I just want to acknowledge the input that we got, first of all, from the tree board on Monday night, as well as from the council last night about the urban forestry amendments. And we've had a couple of potential suggestions about how to address that, that are brought up that I would just offer as a conversation, and then we can have further discussions at the work session next year. The idea being that we're obviously, as we explained, we're pretty tight in terms of the time we have trying to get the update done and the other required things that we need to get done. So we're going to have to make some choices on what comes in and what goes out. One of the suggestions was, and this is really kind of a swap based on the intensity and the hours that we anticipate for a particular project. Both of these ideas are, both of the things that we're proposing are similar in intensity in terms of requirements for what the work that staff will need to do, but also intensity for what we anticipate the Planning Commission and Tree Board and the Council will need to deal with. And that's the multifamily tax program update, and then also the tree preservation code update, the one portion of the three things that we were looking at for the urban forestry. We had estimated they would both have about the same number of hours. We do know that they would probably have the same level of community interest and activity. And so one of the suggestions that have been made was that we consider swapping out the multifamily tax exemption program work and moving that to 26, because the multifamily tax exemption program effectively will sunset on December 31st of next year, of 26, excuse me, I'm already in 25. So that gives us at least it gives us a year to get going and try to come up with either an alternative or, something else for that particular program. It would also allow us to start work again on the tree preservation code work. I'm looking at our current schedule. I'm actually trying to map out what our current schedule is in terms of how it works throughout the year. I think we're going to be able to devote focused staff time to tree preservation work at the second half of the year, once we get all the work that we need to get done and preparing the draft plans and ordinances and stuff in place. And that starts through the adoption process, which we're currently looking at starting that in July. So that will allow us to turn our attention back to the tree preservation work. So I just wanted to mention that as a possibility. There was also some suggestions potentially about, could we contract out some of the work that we were looking at doing for the Parks and Recreation Plan update. I'm afraid I don't think we're going to be able to do that, because what we as staff have to do for that work is basically take it through the public process. And also, we're probably in the best position to know what the connections are to every other plan and see those connections that a consultant would be able to do. So those are some of the suggestions we've seen so far. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I had sent an email yesterday during our discussion about the possibility of swapping with the MFTE, because I was curious if that sunset date was mid-year. It sounds like it's towards the end of the year, so it won't expire, which means we could potentially push that out a year. For the purposes of our discussion here, I think we need to be cognizant of the fact that if we do that, that means that the program exists as it exists today for another year. So if a prospective applicant walks through the door and avails themselves of a law that we've made, personally, I think that's fair for them to do that, right? And as a council, we have a duty to take a vote on approving that or not. And though it's kind of unclear whether a no vote would actually stop that from proceeding at all. But regardless, I think that's a potential swap that, I'm interested to hear what the other folks here think, but I would be open to doing that, to pushing off the MFT for a year, but we need to be, I think, realistic about what that means, because I think this group has said it deserves another look. So I'm interested to hear what folks' thoughts are on that.
So what does that mean for us, taking another look at it? We're saying we're putting off even taking a look at it for how long?
It would be on, if we swapped it with the MFT, that means that The MFT would be on the 2026 work plan to address in terms of changing the ordinance for how it works. So who is eligible, what percentage of units, how long are they affordable? Are we gonna adopt the changes the state made? Are we gonna adopt the changes Olympia made? Are we gonna discontinue the program? I mean, like, I think that my vision of that is a comprehensive look at the program, which includes looking at how it's benefited us to date and how it hasn't. If that's, you know, there's data in either direction of that. So I think that's like a comprehensive look at the program. And in terms of what we would be able to do if it's not on the work plan, like we've gotten, you know, a periodic update from you, Brad, about like this is how many units there are that we've done and things like that. But I don't know if you would have, if it's not on the work plan, we don't have capacity to do something more significant than the simple data collection, I would think. Is that correct, Brad?
Yeah, that's correct. I think to really answer the questions that we know the council members have about the program and potential options, they would require more time than we'll be able to provide in 25.
Okay, so I'm a little bit just wondering, so we are saying, when we say swap out, we are saying that we will have the tax exemption thing just continue, you're saying, Michael, as it is for another year? And then in that place, we would put the tree ordinance, and then we would address maybe, I don't know if we'd talk about the tax in taxing stuff within this year, or would that just be put off until 26?
What I'm saying is I think as an option, which yes to almost everything you said except the last part. I think as an option, right now, the tree preservation ordinance, there's 3 items that fall under the umbrella of the tree stuff. There's street trees, there's tree preservation ordinance, and I forget what the third one is.
No landscaping.
Yeah. So one of those pieces is the tree preservation ordinance, which is, I don't know how other people feel. I think is one of the, is more vital out of those 3. And if you take that and put it above the line on the work plan, but you take MFT and put that below the line, so that if we free up time throughout the year, maybe that could come back up, but you would put MFT below the line, which means you would tackle it and put it above the line in 2026 to begin work on it in 2026, which means it continues as it exists today. And we would work on it, on changing how it functions or not. We would assess that and have a whole, you know, series of work dedicated to examining it in 2026.
26, so we wouldn't be discussing this at all during 2025.
Probably not in a substantive fashion unless someone applies for an exemption, in which case as a council, we are obligated to vote on that if they are eligible for it. But we would be in a precarious position if we ever denied it because they're legally eligible for it.
Thank you. I understand now. I'm getting my ears mixed up. They're passing by too quickly. Yeah.
Okay, Brad's already in 2025.
Oh, yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yeah,
Tell me
well,
how 24 was. I don't remember.
he's saying, well, next year, and I'm like, geez, next year.
Well, I'm curious, Joan, how do you feel about that option? Like,
Yeah, I just didn't want us to leave this and wait another year to pick up any of this, because I just think it goes with other things we're saying we are and we do and we believe in, and the whole, you know, people are asking about it as related to climate. You know, it makes people who make the connection between trees and climate ask about it, but that's fine that they ask about it. I'm glad that they're interested and curious, but I'm happy that we will deal with it in 2025.
I'm in support of that proposed option, right? Like all the things that are happening, there's a larger discussion. We're getting feedback from Habitat for Humanity and Homes First and other ones about that multifamily. Like they would like 25, 30. What about 99 years, right? All this stuff is coming at us. That's going to be a longer conversation. But we have, when things come up like our trees, and there's a lot of discussion about trees, let's not lose that momentum. So I'm in support of this option being proposed to the rest of council.
Okay, so we will update the work program to reflect that for your discussion in January. And if there are any other things that come up as you're reviewing the documents and the work program before then, please let us know. And we'll incorporate those as part of our discussion.
Could you just, I've forgotten if I already knew, I don't know now, when it is that we're hiring the urban forester?
Talking with, well, Lisa answered that question for the tree board on Monday night. She said that the notice is in process with our personnel department. Once they're done with the review, then we'll be going out for that. And effectively, starting in early January. So her hope is to get the person whole process, rehiring process and selection process completed within the first quarter to get them going. So and just judging by the number of items that were identified on the urban forestry management plan list, that will be very busy. So,
Oh, that'll help us because that'll be about halfway through the year then, or
yeah, they're going to need a little time to find out, basic things like where their desk is and that kind of stuff. But yeah, the intent would be really that they would be diving in. Also, Alyssa mentioned, I think this is important to talk about, is that the urban foresters are going to really, the intent is for them to come in and do an evaluation of what we're currently doing and start to provide suggestions, first of all, on what they think is probably the best idea for priorities, and go from there. And I think that makes a lot of sense. Number one, it's an outside view. Number two, it's a person trained in that. And so I think coming from that, we'll have a better idea of what the work program is after they've had a little time to sort of absorb what we currently have.
Is this person in our suggested requirements or whatever, have some training or I'm sure some understanding or whatever around climate and climate action things? And
that I don't know, but that's a good question for Alyssa and for definitely looking at the job description. I would be surprised if there wasn't some thought about that.
Because that really needs to be connected, and it's becoming even more so. And I think it's connected to our all these other differences and plans we're making for planning and for developing of our lands and homes and things like that. I think it's important that we see that as impacting.
I think all I would say, Councilmember Kathy, is I don't know if it's explicitly in the job description, but it is indirectly a consideration. This person will be reporting directly to Alyssa, and Alyssa will be that person's supervisor, and Alyssa is going to be, as she does now, coordinating and collaborating very directly with the community development staff, for such as she's doing, for example, with the development of the climate element for the comp plan. So the work of this person is directly tied to all of our sustainability initiatives, including climate action.
Great. Now, who are you? You came right into our meeting. I don't know if I've heard you before.
I've been listening, I promise.
I know. So when can we just say now and make sure that Alyssa is available on our work session for the 14th?
We could certainly do that if you'd like.
Well, aren't we going to be talking about some of this again, or not?
Some of which. So on the 14th, we'll be talking about the work plan. Absolutely.
Yeah. I'm talking about what we're talking about here today, and I just think to have her there and to talk about why we made some of these decisions and where we're headed on this.
Yeah, we can certainly bring her in if you'd like, and have her be available if you have any questions. I would expect that by January 14th, the job of the urban forester, that position will be advertised and in active recruitment at that point.
Well, you can check with Brad Medroot and see if he would allow her to come. Yeah.
He's
I-
generally pretty accommodating.
Yeah, I can't control Alyssa.
Okay, thank you, Lisa. I think that's good.
You bet. You're welcome.
All right, I think we have some direction for next steps for the work session then for that item. And I don't think there's anything else on the agenda, so if there's nothing else, I think we are adjourned. Awesome. Thanks, folks. Have a
Yeah.
good morning.
Thank you.